Listen, if your dog goes down the pound, you probably want to go and do this to your local Shire ranger. G'day, it's Colin at the Dog Line here, and I'm training a bunch of rangers. Now, do you want to know who is responsible if your dog gets out on the street?
We are!
Okay, they are responsible, and they have a responsibility to make sure your dog stays at home. But do you know who's going to pay the bills if your dog causes an accident or gets out or even attacks someone?
You are!
Oh my God, you are. And the fine, the liability is quite huge. So stick around. We're going to have a look at the radio dog fence, the differences between the dog fences, and we're going to see what they're going to do. So let's go over and have a look at how they work. Now, with a radio dog fence, what happens is you get a kit with everything you need for one dog, including the first 100 metres of boundary wire. What we do is we wire everything up to make sure it's all working when you get it. And then what happens is you can plug it in on the kitchen bench, you can use it, test the levels in the collar, change the distance of the radio signal, and you can see it working before you start to install it. And of course, we've got our owner's manual, installation guide, and our little test sheets as well. Now, what happens with the dog fence? They all work pretty much the same. You'll get a power supply, which looks a little bit like that. And I'll tell you what this green wire is all about in a minute.
You might want to put it so you can get it off quick.
Now, what happens is the power plug plugs into a normal power point, and that powers a radio transmitter, which is this little doobalaki here. So if I held this collar up to that little test loop that we've got, you'll hear it maybe, and you'll see the light flashing. So that's all working when you get it. The transmitter is like a radio. If that was a CB radio in a car, guys, the radio signal would transmit forever, and then you would pick it up on your walkie-talkie, right? So that's the radio signal. But what we do with the radio signal, the radio wire, is we run the wire from the transmitter, touching together, to the area you want the dog to stay in, and the dog can walk across those two touching wires. I'll get to that in a minute. Then what happens is you take the wire all the way around your property, and you return back to the transmitter that way. So the radio signal heads north to get to the boundary, goes all the way around the property in one direction, then it heads south to get back to the transmitter. North and south will neutralise the signal. So if you've got a garden bed here and you've got fish in it, you can run the wire to there, go around there, and then the dogs can walk across here, but they can't get into the radio signal. Now, the important things that we've actually put into our system, we've made sure we've got good lightning protection, because if you imagine you get lightning strike like that, and it hits the ground, it can get into the wire and damage the circuit board inside your transmitter. So this green earth wire on the transmitter will protect the transmitter from lightning damage, because we have that green earth wire that comes back to the third pin. So keep an eye out if you're looking at systems and they only have 2 pins. We have 3 pins to earth out any lightning strikes. So we have a warranty on our transmitter that covers you for lightning and surge damage on the circuit board, and it won't cost you big bucks to replace if it does get damaged. The other thing we have in our larger property system, we have the external surge box, which is a junction box. The radio wires will go into that junction box and out, and that's also connected to another earth rod. So once you close the circuit on the system, the radio signal is getting blocked by the transmitter, and it's got no choice to expand out. So you can control the distance and push the dog further away from the fence by adjusting the pressure or the range control, and it pushes it further away. How you going with that, guys? Is that pretty cool? Yeah? Having some fun? Yeah. Very good. All right. So, 7. You got up to 7. There's no correlation between...
He didn't take his finger off either.
No pain, no brain, doesn't work. It's no correlation between pain and intelligence, that's for sure. Okay, so if you've got the radio signal coming out of the wire, when the dog wears the collar, and the collar goes towards the radio signal and hits the signal, the first 10% of the signal is usually the warning zone. Now, if a system doesn't have a warning zone, then that could be a bit of a drama, but you could actually set it on our standard collars that have a little beeper. So when the dog walks towards the radio signal, it hits the warning zone, and what some dogs can do with some systems is sit there and run down the battery. So what we've got is a system called anti-linger. So if the dog sits in that warning zone for 15 seconds, he's going to get a little ping from the collar, Okay, the first little part was the warning zone.
Yeah.
And then if he sits there, he'll get a little ping. Now that stops the battery running down. And I know that there are a lot of dogs down the pound that have batteries in the collars that are flat because they run down the battery, people forget to change the battery. After a couple of months, the dog jumps the fence. So what we've got with our system, we've got a battery that will last up to 2 years, but it depends on the dog and how often they go into the radio signal. But because people forget to change the batteries and the dogs can intentionally run the batteries down, you'll find that dogs can get out. So it's a very frustrating thing. That's probably my favourite thing about the collar, is that we have the anti-linger system. We also have a system where you can change the level in the collar. So you can actually hold the magnet up to the side of the collar and it'll beep and let you know what level the dog's going to be corrected on, which is very important for the training. If we can control the dog and train them at the low level in the collar, it then becomes their own decision not to go near the fence, and when we let them go, that's when we can utilise the higher levels. So I'll just show you that. This is level 0, which is no static correction at all. And then if we change that to a different level, quite simply by holding the magnet up, then it will start to give the warning zone and the corrections to the collar at the low level. But if I change that up to higher levels, you'll see the difference in the light. Now, the other things that people are concerned about is also something called run-through. Quite often, you'll see that light's brighter. It's quite often if a dog's desire to get out, so if the dog's desire to, say, chase the rabbit or run and chase a dog across the road is up at this sort of level, and the dog's perception of the collar is here, they're going to run through every time. But then what will happen is they'll run through to chase the rabbit, and when they come to go home, their desire to get back home is down here, and their perception of what comes out of the collar is here. So getting a good collar in the first place and focusing on the training really pays dividends later on. We've got people who've got, and they're in this room actually, dogs on this system with no fences on their property whatsoever. After a few days of training, following the guidance, the dog won't even go across when there's other animals, horses wandering across the road.
And she learnt really quickly. I reckon she was pretty well right the first day.
Yep.
But I still made sure I continued the training for 2 or 3, or for the 3 days. Even though I think we were right, but I still made sure I did the 3 days worth of training.
The training is very important because if we can make it it's not going to be pleasant for the dog, they're not going to like it at all, but we don't want to traumatise them and end up with the dog sitting on the porch and they don't want to go anywhere, because that's a lot of reversing it. And then one day they think, well, I'm just going to bolt across the thing, and because they have no respect for the radio signal, and we need to give them a lot of time. But we've got little training guides. You can log on and you can actually see the private training where dogs are experiencing this for the first time. So the receiver collar, there's a few things going on. We're changing the levels in the collar and we're controlling the distance of the radio signal. Now the signal that comes out of our transmitter is FM, not AM, so your TV won't go funny and it won't bounce around. And the power supply is regulated, so if there is a power spike and it does get into the system, then it's not going to expand the radio signal all of a sudden and give the dog false corrections and you end up with a traumatised dog that doesn't know what's going on. A couple of things about the collar as opposed to other things I've seen on the market. There's a chew warranty on the housing. We make it out of polycarbonate, not PVC. So if a dog can chew the box to bits, if you've got more than one dog, that's a very good feature. We also have 3 aerials in the collar. If it's upside down and back to front on the dog's neck, it will still pick up the radio signal from one of those aerials, and a super fast anti-run-through reaction time. So if the dog does try and go through it or forget, the collar is going to correct the dog within 1/8 of a second. So that's quite a good feature as far as making sure the collar is going to activate. But again, getting back to the battery. If the battery's flat, you're back to square one. And listen, some people do say to me that we had it on for dog for 6 months and then turned it off and then we were fine. But for every one person I've heard say that, I've heard another 2 people say the same thing, and then they said, oh yeah, but we didn't change the battery, and then we decided he didn't need the collar on anymore and we just left it on with a flat battery, but 6 months later he ran through and we had to go down the pound and pay $300. You know, if you're lucky, it's that cheap. Now, as far as smaller dogs and cats go, we do have miniature collars so we can just mix and match. And we do have premium collars as well with lower levels and higher levels. So the wire we use is another thing that seems to be a big problem. I have brought over another system. I can show it in a bit more detail. I don't know where this wire comes out, but it's easy enough for me just to break the wire. So with our wire, we've made sure that it's a high density polyethylene coated wire, has a 20-year UV rating, and I've lost my little sample roll. The 20-year UV rating means that it can sit in the sun without getting sun damage, and it's a very strong wire. We've got other videos on that as well. Okay, so when you do train the dog, using visual codes as well is quite good. We have flags, so when you put the flag in the ground as you do the training, you might walk the dog up to the open gateway and start the training at their favourite escape spot or the open driveway, which is the biggest risk. Take them into the radio signal, and then when they get a ping and they react, drag them out. When they refuse to go through, you can actually get the flag, flick it a couple of times, put it in the driveway or at the edges, and they know visually where this is. And then later on you can take the flags and give them to your neighbours because you've done the right thing. They should too. That leads me into your neighbours getting dog fences. We're having a lot of people call up and say, look, I bought this one, my neighbour's got the same system, and neither of our systems are working. That's because two radio frequencies together do not like each other, and they can affect the whole thing. So if you go for coded digital FM like we have, you won't have a problem. Your neighbour gets a fence and it's not a good quality one, they more than likely will have a problem. But if you got one and bad quality or poor quality and they got the same one, then you both have a drama. The reason is what we can also do is change the frequency of the transmitter over to a different frequency, and we can flick the collars over to a different frequency. But you've got to stand on your left foot and put your finger in your ear and then change it over and flick the buttons, that sort of thing. But we can do that over the phone. Okay, if you want any more information, the thing to do is to fill in the quote form. Don't let these guys catch your dog out because they will fine you. And then fill in the quote form or give us a call. We can send you information about a system that's going to match your property and match your dog and last you for many, many years. All right, thanks very much for listening.